The humid air of Kepler 442b made Jake Martinez sweat as he walked through the dense jungle. His boots sank into the soft ground with each step. The alien planet felt strange under the purple sky, with its two small suns casting weird shadows. Through the thick trees, Jake wiped his forehead and looked at the scanner in his hand. The readings showed something odd in the soil samples he had taken that morning. Jake worked as a xenobiologist for the human expedition team. He studied alien life forms and how they lived on different planets. For 3 months now, he had been working with the Zephyrians on this research mission. The Zephyrians were tall aliens with bodies that looked like they were made of blue crystal. They could talk to each other without speaking, using their minds instead of their mouths. They thought they were much smarter than humans and treated Jake and his 2 human friends like children. The main camp sat in a clearing 2 kilometers away from where Jake now stood. The Zephyrians had built their base using bright energy shields that glowed blue in the darkness. Their machines could change the air and make it perfect for breathing. Everything they used was advanced and made Jake feel like his human tools were toys in comparison. Jake heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Lisa Parker walking toward him. Lisa worked as the team geologist, which meant she studied rocks and soil. She was smart and tough, with short brown hair and dirt under her fingernails from digging in the ground all day. She carried a heavy bag full of rock samples. Find anything interesting today? Lisa asked as she stopped next to Jake. Jake showed her his scanner. The soil readings are strange in this area. Look at these numbers. Lisa took the scanner and studied the display. Her face became serious as she read the data. This is not normal. The ground here has been disturbed, but not by any machine we know about. That is what I thought too, Jake said. Something big has been moving under the ground. But Commander Veltar does not want to hear about it. Commander Veltar was the leader of the Zephyrian research team. He was taller than the other aliens and his crystal body was darker blue. He had been exploring space for many years and thought humans were too new to space travel to understand important things. Every time Jake tried to share his findings, Commander Veltar would dismiss them as human mistakes. Lisa and Jake walked back toward the camp together. The jungle around them was full of strange sounds. Small creatures moved in the trees above them, and insects buzzed in the thick air. Jake had been studying these creatures for months and knew they were different from anything on Earth. They were smarter and worked together in ways that surprised him. As they reached the camp, they saw Pete Collins standing guard at the entrance. Pete was a soldier who protected the human team. He was big and strong, with scars on his arms from old battles. He did not trust the Zephyrians and always kept his weapons ready. The aliens had told him that weapons were not needed on this peaceful research mission, but Pete did not listen to them. How did your jungle walk go? Pete asked as Jake and Lisa approached. We found something the Zephyrians should know about, Jake said, but they will not listen to us. Pete shook his head. They think they know everything. One day that attitude will get them in trouble. The 3 humans entered the camp where the Zephyrians were working. The aliens moved around their glowing machines, touching screens that appeared in the air. They spoke to each other using their mind powers, which made no sound. Sometimes they would look at the humans, and Jake could tell they were talking about them. Commander Veltar stood in the center of the camp, studying a large map that floated in the air. The map showed the northern part of the planet where Jake had been taking his readings. Red dots marked places where the Zephyrians wanted to explore next. Jake walked up to the commander. Sir, I need to show you something important. Commander. Veltar did not look at Jake. His crystal body glowed slightly as he spoke. What is it, human? The soil readings from the northern sector show unusual activity. Something large has been moving underground. It might be dangerous to go there. The commander finally turned to face Jake. His eyes were like blue diamonds. That seemed to look right through him. Your primitive instruments cannot understand what they are measuring. We have advanced scanners that show no danger in that area. But the patterns in the soil are not your concern, Commander Veltar interrupted. We have detected valuable minerals in the northern sector. Tomorrow we will establish a forward observation post to study them. Jake felt frustrated. He looked at Lisa and Pete, who both looked angry. The Zephyrians always acted like human knowledge was worthless. They had better technology, but they did not understand this planet like Jake did. With respect, Commander, Lisa said, Jake has been studying this planet longer than anyone. Maybe we should listen to his concerns. Another Zephyrian walked over to them. This one was smaller and younger looking. Commander, the human fears are understandable. Their species is naturally cautious because they are not as advanced as we are. Pete stepped forward. Maybe being cautious is not such a bad thing. Commander Veltar raised his hand. Enough, we will proceed with the plan. 12 of our researchers will go to the northern sector tomorrow. The humans will remain here and continue their basic work. That night Jake could not sleep. He lay in his tent listening to the sounds of the jungle. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. The Zephyrians were smart, but they did not understand this planet the way he did. They relied too much on their machines and not enough on careful observation. Lisa sat outside her tent, looking at rock samples under a small light. Pete cleaned his weapons, even though the Zephyrians had told him they were not needed. The three humans had become good friends during their time on the planet. They looked out for each other while the aliens treated them like they were not important. Jake got up and walked over to Lisa. I have a bad feeling about tomorrow. Me too, Lisa said. The ground in that area is not stable. If something big is moving under it, setting up a camp there could be dangerous. The Zephyrians are too proud to listen to us, Pete said as he joined them. They think their technology can handle any problem. Jake looked up at the strange stars in the alien sky. I hope they are right, but if they are wrong, we might all be in trouble. The next morning, Commander Veltar and his team prepared to leave for the northern sector. They loaded their equipment into flying vehicles that made no sound. Jake watched them go, his stomach tight with worry. The Zephyrians flew away toward the northern jungle, confident that their advanced technology would protect them from any danger. Jake did not know that deep under the ground, something ancient and hungry was beginning to stir. The morning sun cast long shadows through the jungle as Jake Martinez stood at the edge of the main camp. He held his scanner in one hand and watched the northern horizon where Commander Veltar and his team had gone the day before. The Zephyrians had been quiet on their communication devices since they arrived at their destination. This worried Jake more than he wanted to admit. Lisa Parker walked up beside him, carrying her geological equipment. Any word from the forward team? Jake shook his head. They sent one message yesterday saying they had arrived safely. Nothing since then. Pete Collins joined them, his hand resting on his weapon. I do not like this silence. The Zephyrians usually talk constantly about their discoveries. The three humans had spent the morning doing routine research work around the main camp, but Jake could not focus on his studies. His scanner kept showing the same strange readings from the northern sector. The underground disturbance was getting stronger, not weaker. Something was happening beneath the surface of the planet. Suddenly, Jake's communication device crackled to life. Commander Veltar's voice came through, but it sounded different. There was fear in his tone, something Jake had never heard from a Zephyrian before. Main camp, this is Commander Veltar. We have a situation here. The ground is shaking and we are detecting massive movement beneath our position. Jake grabbed the device. Commander, this is Jake Martinez. What kind of movement are you seeing? It appears to be biological in nature. Large creatures are moving through tunnel systems under the ground. Our scanners show they are heading toward the surface. Lisa took the device from Jake. Commander, you need to leave that area immediately. The ground there is not stable. We are scientists, not cowards. Commander Veltar replied. We will observe and record this phenomenon. It could be the discovery of the century. Pete stepped forward. Commander, sometimes the smart thing to do is run. But the communication device went silent. Jake tried calling several times, but there was no response. He looked at Lisa and Pete and saw his own fear reflected in their faces. 20 minutes later, the device crackled again. This time it was a different Zephyrian voice, younger and full of panic. Main camp, this is Researcher. Cathara, the commander is gone. They came from everywhere at once. We cannot stop them. Who came from where? Jake asked urgently. The insects. Millions of them. They are huge and they work together like a single mind. Our energy shields cannot stop them. They are eating through our defenses like they are nothing. The sound of buzzing filled the communication device. It was so loud that Jake had to hold the device away from his ear. Behind the buzzing, he could hear Zephyrian voices screaming in terror. The energy shields are failing, Cathara's voice continued. These creatures secrete some kind of acid that dissolves our technology. Nothing we have works against them. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. We need to get ready to run. But Jake was listening carefully to the sounds coming from the device. The buzzing had a pattern to it, like a language. These creatures were not just attacking randomly. They were organized and intelligent. Cathara, can you hear me? Jake called into the device. Yes, but barely. I'm hiding in what remains of our shelter. The others are all gone. The insects took them. They stripped the flesh from their crystal bodies in seconds. Pete had already started gathering their emergency supplies. How long do we have? I do not know, Cathara replied. Wait, I can see. Them through the wall. They are looking at our technology. They seem to be studying it, learning from it. The buzzing sound grew louder. Then Cathara screamed, and the communication device went dead. Jake tried calling again and again, but there was no response. The forward team was gone. Jake looked at his scanner. The readings showed the underground disturbance was moving south toward their position. Whatever had destroyed the Zephyrian team was heading straight for them. We have maybe 6 hours before they reach us, Jake said. Lisa was already studying her geological maps. These creatures avoided certain areas of the jungle when they attacked. Look at the pattern of destruction. She showed Jake and Pete her readings. The insects had stayed away from areas with high clay content and standing water. They seemed to prefer dry, sandy soil. They are called devastators, Jake said suddenly. I read about similar creatures in the planetary database, but the records said they were extinct. Pete loaded his weapons. Well, they are not extinct now. How do we fight them? Jake thought about what he had heard over the communication device. The Zephyrians had the best technology in the galaxy, and it did not help them. These creatures have evolved to deal with energy weapons and force fields. So what do we do? Lisa asked. Jake looked at the jungle around them. We think like humans, not like aliens. We use what the planet gives us. The three humans spent the next hour analyzing everything they knew about the devastators. The creatures were about the size of earth hornets, but with armor-like bodies that could resist energy weapons. They moved in coordinated swarms and could dissolve advanced technology with their acidic secretions, but they had weaknesses. They avoided certain types of soil and seemed to dislike water. Jake realized that these creatures had evolved specifically for this planet. They knew how to deal with natural threats, but they might not know how to handle human tactics. The Zephyrians failed because they relied on their technology, Jake explained. But humans have always been good at adapting to new situations. Pete nodded. What do you have in mind? We dig in. We use the clay soil and water to create barriers they cannot cross. We fight them with mud and determination. Lisa looked at Jake like he was crazy. You want to fight millions of alien insects with mud? It worked for humans on Earth for thousands of years, Jake replied. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. In the distance, they could hear a faint buzzing sound. The devastators were coming, and they were hungry. The swarm that had destroyed an entire team of advanced aliens was now heading toward three humans armed with nothing but shovels and an ancient idea. Jake picked up his emergency shovel and headed toward the nearby stream. Come on. We have work to do. The fate of the human expedition now depended on something no alien technology could provide: human stubbornness and the willingness to get their hands dirty. Jake Martinez knelt beside the muddy stream and plunged his hands into the thick clay. The water was cold and the mud stuck to his fingers like glue. He pulled up a handful and examined it closely. The clay had a strange mineral smell that reminded him of metal and earth mixed together. "This is it," Jake said to Lisa Parker and Pete Collins. "This clay has the minerals that the Devastators avoid." Lisa was already digging with her geological tools. "The mineral content here is different from the areas they attacked. There's more iron and copper in this soil." Pete stood guard with his weapon ready, listening for the sound of approaching insects. "How much time do we have?" Jake looked at his scanner. The readings showed the swarm was still moving toward them, but they were taking their time. Maybe 5 hours, maybe less. The 3 humans worked frantically to dig clay from the stream. They used their hands, camping shovels, and even scientific equipment to scoop up the thick mud. Their clothes became dirty and their hands were raw from digging, but they did not stop. "We need to create a defensive line," Pete said as he dug. "Something that will confuse them and slow them down." Jake had been thinking about this problem since they started digging. "We make trenches in a zigzag pattern. The Devastators move in straight lines when they attack. If we force them to change direction, it will break up their formation." Lisa wiped sweat from her face, leaving a streak of mud on her cheek. "How deep do the trenches need to be?" "Deep enough to hold water and wide enough that they cannot easily cross," Jake replied. "Maybe 2 meters wide and 1 meter deep." They spent the next 2 hours digging the first trench. It was hard work in the humid jungle air. Their backs ached and their hands were covered in blisters, but they did not complain. They knew their lives depended on this work as they dug. Jake explained his theory about why the clay might protect them. The Devastators use their senses to navigate and communicate. The minerals in this clay might interfere with those senses. "Like jamming a radio signal," Pete said, understanding immediately. "Exactly. If we cover ourselves with this mud, they might not be able to find us." Lisa had been studying the soil samples while they worked. "There is something else. The insects that live in this area are different from the ones near the Zephyrian camp. They are smaller and less aggressive." Jake looked up from his digging. "What do you mean?" "I think the clay does not just hide us from the Devastators. I think it actually repels them. They have learned to avoid this area over many generations." This was good news, but Jake knew they still had a lot of work to do. One trench would not be enough to stop millions of insects. They needed a complete defensive system. "We need at least 3 lines of trenches," Pete said. "If they break through one, the others will slow them down." The 3 humans worked harder than they had ever worked before. They dug trench after trench, connecting them with smaller channels that would carry water from the stream. The water would make the barriers even more effective. As they worked, they could hear the buzzing sound getting louder. The Devastators were getting closer. Jake tried not to think about what had happened to the Zephyrian team. Instead, he focused on the work in front of him. "We need to make the mud thicker," Lisa said. "If we mix in some of the local vegetation, it will stick to us better." She showed them how to mix clay with crushed leaves and small twigs. The mixture was thick and sticky, but it would stay on their skin and clothes for hours. Pete tested the mud mixture by covering his arms with it. "It feels strange, but I can see how it would hide our scent." Jake was working on the second trench when he had another idea. "We need to create false trails. If we can make them think we went in a different direction, they might follow the wrong path." "How do we do that?" Lisa asked. "We leave some of our equipment in different places. Things that still have our scent on them. The Devastators will investigate those areas while we hide in our trenches." They took some of their clothes and camping gear and placed them in various locations around the jungle. Each item was placed carefully to lead the insects away from their real position. The buzzing sound was getting much louder now. Jake estimated they had less than 2 hours before the swarm arrived. They had finished 3 lines of trenches and filled them with water from the stream. Now they needed to prepare themselves. "Time to get muddy," Pete said. The 3 humans covered themselves completely with the clay mixture. They rubbed it into their hair, on their faces, and all over their clothes. The mud was cold and uncomfortable, but it might save their lives. Jake looked at his friends. They looked like ancient warriors painted for battle. Lisa's blonde hair was now brown with mud, and Pete's face was completely covered except for his eyes. "We look ridiculous," Lisa said, "but we are alive," Pete replied. "That is what matters." They moved to their defensive positions in the center. Trench. Jake had his scanner to monitor the approaching swarm. Lisa had her geological equipment to watch for ground vibrations. Pete had his weapons ready. Even though they probably would not work against the Devastators, the buzzing sound was very loud now. Through the jungle trees, Jake could see movement. Dark shapes were flowing through the forest like a black river. The Devastators were coming in greater numbers than he had imagined. "Remember," Jake whispered to his friends, "stay completely still. Do not move unless you absolutely have to. The mud will hide us, but only if we do not give ourselves away." The first Devastators appeared at the edge of their clearing. They were even more terrifying than Jake had imagined. Each insect was the size of a small bird, with armor-like shells that gleamed in the jungle light. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single organism. Jake held his breath as the swarm approached their first trench. This was the moment of truth. Either his plan would work, or they would all die like the Zephyrians. The fate of the human expedition now rested on mud, water, and the hope that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. The first wave of Devastators hit their outer trench like a black tsunami. Jake Martinez held his breath as millions of insects swarmed toward their position. The buzzing sound was so loud it hurt his ears. Through the mud covering his face, he watched the creatures approach their first line of defense. The Devastators reached the water-filled trench and suddenly stopped. The insects at the front of the swarm pulled back as if they had hit an invisible wall. Their antennae twitched and they made clicking sounds that Jake had never heard before. The creatures seemed confused and angry. Lisa Parker lay completely still in the mud beside Jake. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she did not move. Pete Collins gripped his weapon tighter, even though he knew it would be useless against so many insects. The swarm began to spread out along the first trench, looking for a way across. Some of the Devastators tried to fly over the water, but they turned back before crossing completely. Others attempted to land on the muddy banks, but they quickly retreated when they touched the clay. "It is working," Jake whispered so quietly that only Lisa and Pete could hear him, but the victory was short-lived. The Devastators were learning. Jake watched as groups of insects began to test different approaches. They were not just mindless creatures following instinct. They were intelligent and adaptable. A group of about 50 Devastators flew higher than the others, trying to go over the trench system entirely. Jake's heart pounded as they passed overhead. The insects flew in perfect formation, scanning the ground below with their compound eyes. One of the creatures stopped directly above their hiding spot. It hovered there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Jake could see its dark body against the purple sky. The insect's antennae moved back and forth as it searched for something. Then the creature flew away to join the others. Jake let out a breath he had been holding. The mud covering was working. The insects could not detect them through the clay and mineral scent, but the Devastators were not giving up. They began to organize themselves into different groups. Some continued to test the water barriers while others started to dig. Jake realized with horror that they were trying to tunnel under the trenches. "They are smarter than we thought," Pete whispered. The digging insects worked with incredible speed and coordination. They threw dirt and debris behind them as they burrowed into the ground. Jake could see that they would reach the other side of the trench in less than an hour. Lisa had been watching the digging operation closely. She moved very slowly to avoid attracting attention and whispered to Jake, "The clay layer extends deep into the ground here. They will hit it soon." She was right. The digging insects suddenly stopped their work and retreated from the holes they had made. The clay deep in the ground was affecting them the same way it affected the ones on the surface, but the Devastators adapted again. They began to bring pieces of wood and debris to build bridges across the water trenches. Jake watched in amazement as the insects worked together to construct crude but effective crossing points. We need to do something, Pete said. They are going to get across, Jake thought quickly. He remembered something from his studies of insect behavior on Earth. Wait for them to commit to crossing, then we act. The first group of devastators began to cross their makeshift bridge. They moved carefully, testing each step. Jake waited until about 20 insects were on the bridge. Then he slowly reached for a rock beside him. Jake threw the rock into the water near the bridge. The splash scared the insects and they flew away from the crossing point. But more importantly, the disturbance in the water sent ripples through the clay at the bottom of the trench. The insects reacted to the clay particles in the water as if they were poison. They retreated from the entire area and began to look for other crossing points. Smart thinking, Lisa whispered. The siege continued for hours. The devastators kept trying new approaches, and the humans kept finding ways to stop them. Jake threw more rocks when insects got too close. Lisa used her geological hammer to hit the ground and create vibrations that confused the creatures. Pete remained ready with his weapon in case everything else failed. As the day wore on, Jake noticed that the insects were getting less aggressive. They still surrounded the human position, but they were not attacking as frequently. He realized that the devastators were studying them, trying to understand what they were dealing with. They are learning about us, Jake told his friends. They know we are here, but they cannot figure out how to reach us. The insects began to settle into a pattern. They would test the defenses every few hours, then retreat to wait and watch. It was like being surrounded by a patient predator that was willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Night fell on the alien planet, and the temperature dropped. The humans were cold and uncomfortable in their mud-covered clothes, but they did not dare move from their positions. The devastators were still out there, waiting in the darkness. Jake took the first watch while Lisa and Pete tried to rest. He listened to the sounds of the jungle and watched for any sign of movement. The insects were quieter at night, but they had not gone away. During his watch, Jake observed something important. The devastators were less active during the long night cycle of the planet. They seemed to prefer the daylight hours for their attacks. This gave the humans valuable time to rest and repair their defenses. When Lisa took over the watch, Jake tried to sleep but found it difficult. His mind kept working on the problem of how to survive until rescue arrived. The mud trench system was working, but he knew it was only a temporary solution. As dawn approached, Jake heard the buzzing sound increase again. The devastators were preparing for another day of siege. He woke Pete and Lisa quietly, and they prepared for whatever new tactics the insects might try. The second day of the siege was about to begin, and Jake knew that their survival depended on staying one step ahead of creatures that were learning more about them with each passing hour. The battle of wits between humans and insects continued under the alien sky. The second day of the siege began with Jake Martinez studying the behavior of the devastators more carefully than ever before. He watched how they moved when they attacked and how they communicated with each other. Something was different about their pattern today, and Jake needed to understand what it meant. The insects were still surrounding their position, but they seemed less interested in breaking through the mud trenches. Instead, they were focusing on the areas where the humans had left their equipment as decoys. Jake realized that the creatures were trying to understand what kind of threat they were dealing with. They are studying us the same way we are studying them, Jake whispered to Lisa Parker and Pete Collins. Lisa had been watching the ground vibrations with her equipment. There is something else. The seismic activity underground is changing. It is getting weaker, Jake thought about this information. What if the attack behavior is connected to something happening underground? He remembered his biology training from Earth. Many insects had behavior, patterns tied to their breeding cycles or territorial protection. The devastators might not be attacking just because they were aggressive. They might be protecting something. Lisa, can you tell where the underground activity is strongest? Lisa checked her readings. It is centered about 2 kilometers north of here, right where the Zephyrian camp was located. Jake felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his mind. The Zephyrian terraforming equipment disturbed something underground. Maybe eggs or larvae. The devastators are not trying to hunt us. They are protecting their young. Pete looked confused. What does that mean for us? It means their aggressive behavior should decrease once they think the threat to their colony is gone, Jake explained. We need to convince them that we are not a danger to their offspring. But how could they communicate with creatures that had just destroyed an entire alien research team? Jake thought about the problem while watching the insects patrol around their defenses. Then he remembered something from Lisa's geological reports. The Zephyrian terraforming equipment had been sending vibrations deep into the ground. Those vibrations had disturbed the Devastator colony and triggered their protective response. Lisa, do you still have your seismic equipment? Yes, but it is not very powerful. Powerful enough to send signals through the ground? Lisa understood what Jake was thinking. We could create vibration patterns that mimic the terraforming equipment moving away from their territory. It was a desperate plan, but it might work. The three humans carefully prepared their equipment while staying hidden under their mud covering. They could not let the Devastators know what they were planning. Lisa set up her seismic equipment near the water trench. She programmed it to create specific vibration patterns that would travel through the ground toward the Devastator colony. The signals would make it seem like the dangerous equipment was moving away from their nesting area. Jake watched the insects carefully as Lisa activated the equipment. At first, nothing happened. The Devastators continued their patrol patterns around the human position. Then slowly, Jake noticed changes in their behavior. The insects began to cluster together and communicate with each other using their buzzing sounds. Their movements became less aggressive and more organized. Some of them started to fly back toward the northern sector where their colony was located. It is working, Pete whispered, but Jake knew they needed to be patient. The Devastators were intelligent creatures and they would not be fooled easily. The humans needed to maintain the illusion for several hours to convince the insects that the threat was really gone. Lisa kept the equipment running while the three humans waited in their muddy hiding place. Slowly, over the course of 6 hours, more and more insects left their position. The buzzing sound that had surrounded them for 2 days began to fade. By late afternoon, only a few dozen Devastators remained near their trenches. These seemed to be scouts, watching to make sure the threat did not return. Jake knew that as long as they stayed hidden and quiet, these remaining insects would eventually leave too. As the sun began to set on the second day, the last of the Devastators flew away toward their colony. The siege was over. The three humans had survived using nothing but mud, water, and clever thinking. They waited until it was completely dark before emerging from their hiding places. Their bodies were stiff and sore from lying still for so long. The mud had dried on their skin and clothes, making them look like statues made of clay. I cannot believe that actually worked, Pete said as he stretched his aching muscles. Human stubbornness and a little bit of science, Jake replied. Sometimes that is all you need. 3 days later, a Zephyrian rescue ship arrived at the main camp. The aliens had come looking for their missing research team and were shocked to find the forward camp completely destroyed. They were even more surprised to find 3 humans alive and unharmed. The rescue team leader was a young Zephyrian named Cathara, who had worked with the original expedition. She listened carefully as Jake explained what had happened to Commander Veltar and his team. You survived using mud trenches? Cathara asked, her crystal body glowing with disbelief. Jake demonstrated how the clay minerals interfered with the Devastator's senses. He showed her the trench system and explained how they had used seismic signals to convince the insects to leave. Cathara examined the human defenses with growing respect. Our most advanced technology could not stop these creatures, but you succeeded with materials from the planet itself. The story of the human survival spread quickly through the Zephyrian fleet and then to other worlds. Jake's detailed report about the Devastators and the mud trench defense became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. When they returned to the main Zephyrian homeworld, Jake, Lisa, and Pete were treated as heroes. The aliens who had once dismissed human knowledge now listened carefully to their ideas and observations. Jake was invited to teach at the Galactic Defense Academy, where he trained both humans and aliens in survival techniques. His first lesson was always the same. Sometimes the most advanced technology cannot substitute for careful observation, quick thinking, and the willingness to get dirty. Lisa became the head of planetary geology for all joint human-alien expeditions. Her understanding of how to use local materials for defense saved many lives on dangerous worlds. Pete was promoted to head of security for diplomatic missions. His philosophy was simple: always be prepared for the unexpected, and never underestimate the value of ancient human tactics. The three friends remained close throughout their careers, and they often told the story of how they defeated millions of alien insects with nothing but mud and determination. It became a famous tale that inspired humans throughout the galaxy to trust in their own abilities and never give up, no matter how impossible the situation might seem.